planner in the Orange County Department of Planning. For the sake of the folks on this call tonight, we ask that you keep your devices on mute. There will be an interactive Q&A after our speakers are finished, and we will open the floor to all comments at the end. Alternatively, if you feel you need an answer right away or just get it off your mind while you're thinking of it, please feel free to use the chat box as we go along, and I'll try and get a quicker answer for you. Please remember that this session is being recorded, and it, along with all the slides, will be available on the Orange County website, specifically on the sustainability page. We are having lots of technology problems, so our last two sessions are not there yet, but I really hope we're going to rectify it this week. And you can go to the orangecountygov.com/293, which is, I guess, the numeric term for the planning department, /environment. You'll get there. And I will be hopefully sending out some further information with the slides and the show. I also want to apologize on the note of IT problems. Many of you may have received an encrypted email or demanding you to use a password to access it. This is all part of our new system, and we are working out the kinks now for the last month, and I apologize because I understand how frustrating it can be. Credits can be granted for this class, but it is up to your municipality if they will honor them as part of the mandatory planning and zoning board official training. And with that out of the way, welcome to our third night of our second annual March Madness Month of Meetings Sustainability Edition. As you can see on the screen, we have an exciting action-packed month ahead of us, even with an extra week of trainings as we go into first week in April. So we're kind of crossing basketball into baseball spring fever. That's indicated in the bottom box, the yellow, and more details on that will be forthcoming. So county planning offers many trainings throughout the year with the intent to inform the educated public and hopefully inspire folks to take action and volunteer in their community. State programs such as the Climate Smart Communities and Clean Energy Community Program incentivize municipalities to go sustainable by awarding points that lead to certified designations that can include higher levels such as bronze, silver, and gold. And there are hundreds of actions that can be taken in the Climate Smart Community Program and about 14 or so in the Clean Energy Community Program, also known as CEC. Many of you have heard about these programs over the years. We've offered lots of classes. But if you are new and you have questions, please contact me at the address on the screen on the bottom. It usually requires volunteers to accomplish these actions, though. And one way to get started is for a municipality to create a Conservation Advisory Commission, also known as a CAC, Conservation Board, an ERB, which is Environmental Review Board, an EMC, which is Environmental Management Commission. Any acronym will do. But it's a bunch of people that will come together and look out for your municipality. And this municipal board typically reviews development proposals in conjunction with a municipal planning board. But this same group of dedicated volunteers can champion other items such as stream monitoring, wetland identification, water protection, and other worthwhile efforts. CACs frequently participate in the New York State Trees for Tributaries program, planting trees along important waterways within their municipality. And our local Montgomery CAC was instrumental in saving a farm from development and instead created a thriving public park named Benedict Field. So there's lots that these CACs, Conservation Advisory Councils, traditionally known as, can do. And recently, these conservation-minded groups are broadening their scope to take on state sustainability challenges that could include recycling, composting, energy audits, waste audits, LED lighting, energy efficient upgrades, municipal comprehensive, sustainable, and energy plans, feasibility studies, vulnerability assessments, clean energy initiatives, electric vehicles and electric charging stations, and community education, so constituents can save money and the environment. And this is just a short list. This is just a few of the many potential actions that can be awarded points from New York State. Some on my wish list include local laws that require all new construction to include geothermal heating and cooling systems. If you have the ground open, why wouldn't you put this in? Photovoltaic or solar systems on roofs and commercial parking lots. Homes should have electric vehicle charging pads. These are things that are no-brainers, and it only lends itself to making the transition down the road. Some other items that are happening: Westchester, maybe Montgomery, disincentivizing fossil fuel lawn landscaping equipment, disincentivizing lawns and incentivizing water saving, no chemical or maintenance, bee, butterfly friendly pollinator gardens. So these are just a few of items of action that could be taken with a powerful group of volunteers in your community. The aforementioned Montgomery CAC has hosted numerous educational forums on everything from solar to electric vehicles and heat pumps. Most recently, with New York State DEC grants, the towns of Montgomery, Cornwall, and Blooming Grove have completed a natural resources inventory, or better known as the NRI, and are working on their community preservation plans, or in the case of Blooming Grove, completed it going on probably 3 years now. I don't want to stray too much from tonight's topic. If you want more details on NRI, Natural Resources Inventory, please come back on March 31st. The creation of a CAC in your municipality will convene a group of interested folks that can advance all of this good work and more, resulting in state recognition, grant preference, and even monies. We have had about a dozen CACs throughout the years in the county. Please let me help you get started one in your community. Just reach out to me. My email's still on the website, although I'm going to be removing it soon. So once you get this group of folks together, which could be as little as 3 people, you can start with the lowest hanging fruit, the easiest actions that will give the most bang for your buck. And we have been learning about many sustainable actions during our March Madness series. So we're going to keep learning now. Tonight, we're going to start off with the Assistant Director of New York State DEC's Office of Climate Change, Mark Lowry. Mark currently leads the state's Interagency Climate Adaptation and Resilience Work Group and several other work groups focused on adaptation to the effects of climate change. He is a member of the Climate Action Council's Land Use and Local Government Advisory Panel and led development of the Council's Adaptation and Resilience recommendations for the draft scoping plan that he's going to talk about now. So, Mark, well, you know what? Let me introduce the rest of the speakers so we can go straight in. How about that? Audrey Friedrichsen, the Land Use and Environmental Advocacy Attorney at Scenic Hudson, will introduce a very exciting planning tool available to municipalities. Her work at Scenic Hudson strongly supports the goals of the 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which increased the state's 2030 renewable energy supply target from 50% to 70% to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. Audrey's work focuses on renewable energy siting and making the Hudson Valley a model for the transition to clean energy. And batting last, but certainly not least, right? So I switched this. I got this wrong today when I was doing this, folks. Audrey's going last, and Melissa Everett, the founding executive director of Sustainable Hudson Valley, a regional organization whose mission is to speed up, scale up, jazz up, and leverage progress against climate change, creating communities where people and nature thrive. She is the author of Making a Living While Making a Difference and is working on a new book about green jobs. As stated earlier, while we'll take questions at the end, please keep conversation and inquiries through the chat box. So as we go along, we can provide clarity. And please, 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 everybody, if for the sake of everyone, if you can mute yourself, you can come back unmuted at the end, but please mute yourself now. I know a lot of us are making dinner, or in my case, feeding the dogs, as you heard that trick into the bowl. With that, Mark, please take it away when you get a chance, because I need to find some screen spot here.
Yeah, you need to stop sharing your screen. Yeah, Kate, you have to stop sharing.
I'm trying, Mark. Hold on one second, please. It is not offering me the stop.
If you see 3 dots with more, that might be your option. If, like me, you're trying to cram about 14 windows into 2 screens.
The 11-year-old to the rescue. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope you are rewarding her amply for all the technical support she's giving. Okay, are you able to see my title slide? All right,
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here this evening to talk about the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which we refer to as the Climate Act, or the CLCPA. Many of you, I think, have probably heard me talk about this act in other venues, and we are certainly looking for opportunities to discuss the draft scoping plan, which is now out for public comment, and I'll get into that in a few moments. My plan tonight is to give an overview of the process by which the plan has come into being, just a very high-level overview of the content. Understand that this draft scoping plan is 342 pages long and has another 500+ pages of appendices, plus thousands, literally thousands of pages of slides and text that contributed to the development of the plan itself. All that documentation, as well as the plan, are available at climate.ny.gov, and that will appear in a few places as we go through here. But it's easy to remember, climate.ny.gov, and most of my slides will be available not only through Kate's website, but they're drawn from an overview deck of slides that's publicly available at climate.ny.gov. So I won't, again, and I stress this because there was one individual after a presentation I did a few weeks ago was quite upset that I didn't get into the details of the transmission and distribution planning. I just want to warn you, there is a limit to how much I can stuff into 30 minutes. And again, there's a lot of detail, so I will answer any questions that I can, but I only wrote about 20 pages of that plan, so I'm also not an expert in all the content. But here we go. Back to the beginning. The state enacted the CLCPA in 2019, and it went into effect on January 1st of 2020. So although the draft scoping plan is still a draft, we don't actually have a final plan, some important aspects of the law have been in effect for well over a year. The statute sets achievement of a net zero economy by 2050 as a goal, requiring an 85% reduction of the state's greenhouse gas emissions, while allowing for sequestration of up to about 15% of our emissions, all these percentages based on a 1990 baseline. The statute sets an interim greenhouse gas emission limit of no more than 60% of 1990 levels. That is, a 40% reduction by 2030 is required. The law requires DEC to promulgate a regulation to set these 60% and 15% limits, which DEC has done. Although the Climate Act does not detail an emissions reduction plan, it does envision an overall strategy of beneficial electrification of the entire New York State economy, and with powering that efficient electrified economy with clean sources of power, including 100% zero carbon electricity by 2040 and investments in storage to balance the intermittency inherent to wind, water, and solar power. There is an interim requirement that 70% of the electricity that's sold in New York State be sourced from renewable sources by 2030. In support of this strategy, the law requires the Department of Public Service, actually the Public Service Commission, to undertake proceedings to ensure large investments in renewable energy and in energy efficiency, as I've laid out here on this slide. The law further requires that investments in disadvantaged communities be prioritized and that support be provided to individuals and communities currently dependent on fossil fuel industries to ensure a just transition to this new economy. I will describe more the statutory requirements in a moment, but first let me describe the overall process as it has unfolded to date to bring everyone up to speed. The statute charges DEC with having the primary regulatory role in limiting greenhouse gas emissions, although other agencies may also issue regulations with the CLCPA as authority to do so. Agency regulations are to be guided by a scoping plan that is in turn to be developed by a Climate Action Council. The council comprises 22 appointees, with the president of NYSERDA and the commissioner of DEC serving as the co-chairs. Pursuant to the statute, the council appointed 7 advisory panels. Each of these advisory panels was charged with making recommendations for greenhouse gas reductions in a particular major emissions sector. The council also asked the Land Use and Local Government Advisory Panel, to which I had been assigned, to develop adaptation and resilience recommendations. And I, in turn, was asked to lead the work group that developed those adaptation and resilience recommendations. So you can blame me for that last chapter in the plan. All recommendations that have been approved by the council are now embodied in a draft scoping plan, which the council released for public comment on December 30th of 2021. Now let's go back to look at some of the requirements of the Climate Act. As I mentioned, the statute has a heavy emphasis on climate and environmental justice and requires a separate body, the Climate Justice Working Group, to establish criteria by which disadvantaged communities are to be identified. The council is to prioritize benefits to disadvantaged communities in its scoping plan and to identify measures to reduce emissions of co-pollutants in disadvantaged communities. Further, at least 35%, with a goal of 40% of the benefits of clean energy investments are to accrue to these disadvantaged communities. As DEC develops its regulations to implement the council's scoping plan, it must ensure that disadvantaged communities are not subjected to any disproportionate burden of those regulations, and DEC must prepare a strategy to monitor and reduce emissions of co-pollutants, that is, non-greenhouse gases that are also pollutants, what we often think of as conventional or criteria pollutants. There must be a strategy to reduce those co-pollutants in disadvantaged communities. The Climate Justice Working Group was charged with developing the criteria by which these disadvantaged communities are to be identified, and with support from DEC and NYSERDA staff, that working group has released those criteria and supporting maps for public comment. So there are really 2 concurrent public comment periods going on, one on the draft scoping plan and one on the draft criteria for the draft disadvantaged community criteria. These draft criteria are to be subject to a 120-day public comment period, and 6 public hearings are to be scheduled in addition to the hearings that are being held on the draft scoping plan. I don't believe the disadvantaged community criteria hearings have been scheduled as yet. An often overlooked but important part of the CLCPA is its Section 7. And I don't want to get too lawyerly here, but Section 7 requires all state agencies to reduce their emissions. But more significantly, Section 7 of the law requires that all state agencies, not just DEC, not just the Public Service Commission, but all state agencies, in considering any action, are required to determine the consistency of that action with the greenhouse gas emission requirements. DEC has already used this requirement as the basis for denying 2 permits to repower existing power plants, including the Danskammer power plant. These denials are now the subject of appeals in court, so we will see how they turn out. But those 2 denials, the other being the Astoria repowering project, represent the first time that DEC has applied this section of the law regarding consistency with the greenhouse gas emission limits. Although public focus has been on the greenhouse gas reduction requirements of the Climate Act, the CLCPA Section 9 also made significant amendments to the Community Risk and Resiliency Act of 2014. As amended, the Community Risk and Resiliency Act, CARA as we refer to it, now requires consideration of all climate change effects during review of applications for all major permits in almost all of DEC's regulatory programs. And it authorizes for the first time DEC to require mitigation of significant climate risk to virtually any asset not owned by the applicant. Okay, so where are we now? As I mentioned, the law took effect on January 1st of 2020, but we had a slow start due to COVID. Obviously, the executive chamber was busy with other things and did not make the appointments to the council nor give staff needed direction until later than we might have hoped. But we still have the original statutory deadlines. Neither the legislature nor the executive chamber nor our commissioner have given us any dispensation with regard to meeting the original statutory deadlines. The council first met in March of 2020, and later in 2020, the advisory panels began development of their recommendations, including extensive public consultation. All of the advisory panel meetings were open to the public. Many of them had public input opportunities. The Land Use and Local Government Advisory Panel that I sat on had a number of roundtables with the local elected officials. The advisory panels presented their recommendations to the council in the spring and early summer of 2021, and staff began preparing the draft scoping plan as consensus was formed within the council around the recommendations that would be included in the draft plan. The council released the draft scoping plan on December 30th of 2021, and a public comment period that was statutorily required to be at least 120 days began on January 1st of 2022. The final scoping plan is due before January 1st of 2023, that is by the end of this year. And DEC has one more year, that is before 2024, to promulgate the regulations to achieve the required emission reductions. This is an extremely aggressive timeline. If you know anything about the state and particularly DEC's regulatory process, it takes generally 1.5 to 2 years to get out for us to promulgate a fairly non-controversial, simple regulation. To have 1 year to promulgate the regulations to implement this law is extremely aggressive, and obviously staff are going to have to start thinking about the necessary regulations before the scoping plan is actually finalized. In parallel to the council's process, and in addition to supporting the council and the various advisory panels, staff have completed several other of the required milestones, including the Public Services Commission of the 70/30 Clean Energy Standard. In addition, DEC and NYSERDA issued a report on the barriers and opportunities to clean energy and adaptation resources that disadvantaged communities face. We released that in December 2021. And DEC has also finalized and released guidance on use of the social cost of carbon, the required regulations setting those 2030 and 2050 greenhouse gas emission limits, and a regulation limiting end uses of certain hydrofluorocarbons. So far, DEC and its sister agencies have met all the statutory requirements, all the deadlines laid out in the law. And as further required by the law, DEC issued a greenhouse gas emissions report at the end of 2021. Based on this report, we can see that the enormity of the challenge that we face is illustrated by the bar graph on the right, reducing the state's greenhouse gas emissions from about 375 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent to about 61 million metric tons over the next 30 years. The inner ring of the circular graph indicates the relative proportions represented by our major emission sectors. In the outer ring, the contribution of sources within each of those sectors. What I want to point out is that although many people tend to think of power plants as the major cause of climate change, Here in New York, they are a fairly small proportion of our total emissions profile at about 13%. New York State is thought to have the cleanest electrical grid in the nation. So again, at 13%, our power plants are not our major source of emissions. The transportation sector at 28% is much larger, and our buildings at about a third, 32 to 33%, represent significantly larger sources of emissions. And it's good to focus on the building sector. What that means the combustion, those are emissions associated with combustion of natural gas and oil, mostly to heat water and space. And understanding that many of the buildings that we will have in 2050 are already in existence, it will take significant amount of work to retrofit those buildings to get them off fossil fuels. Another important but perhaps surprising finding of our greenhouse gas emissions report was the degree to which waste management contributes to our greenhouse gas profile at about 12%. So it's just a little shy of the power plants. Waste management in this case includes methane that leaks from landfills, as well as methane emitted at wastewater treatment plants. Agriculture is an important but fairly small part of our greenhouse gas emissions profile in New York at about 6%. Many states have a much higher proportion of their emissions coming from agriculture. But I wanted to go through that so that people have an understanding of why some actions are being prioritized, because we're really looking to see the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, in terms of reducing our emissions. The Council's planning has been informed by analysis performed by NYSERDA, the Energy Research and Development Authority, to integrate all the advisory panel recommendations to assess the likely total effects on greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the costs and benefits of implementing this plan. This analysis included a reference case based on a business as usual scenario plus greenhouse gas reduction policies that are already in place. So that was the reference case, just continuing to do what we're doing now. There was a scenario 1 that included all the recommendations as presented by the advisory panels. So they took every one of the recommendations from the advisory panel, put it into their models, which I won't even begin to try to explain, to see what the net effect would be. The analysis indicated that these recommendations, as they came from the 7 advisory panels, by themselves were not sufficient to achieve the required emission reductions, which is why we don't even show scenario 1 on this slide. The Council went back to the drawing board, working with staff, and developed 3 action scenarios that are described here, all of which would be expected to achieve the required emission reductions. All these scenarios are based on foundational strategies that must be included if we are to achieve the required greenhouse gas emission reductions, but they do provide for some different approaches to reducing emissions from some sources. This figure is busy, and I'm not going to try to explain it here. It is available on the website with explanation, but it represents a comparison among those 3 action scenarios that are described in the draft scoping plan. Again, certain foundational strategies to achieve the majority of the required emission reductions appear across all 3 action scenarios. The fact is, we as a global society, have postponed meaningful action to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, that now to achieve the required emissions, there are very few options that we can leave off the table. Looking, however, across the 3, in terms of their differences, the 3 action scenarios differ somewhat in the use of the low carbon fuels derived from biomass and green hydrogen versus an accelerated transition away from all combustion. So there are some folks that have advocated that we make substantial use of combustion of biomass and green hydrogen for some hard to electrify applications like heavy equipment or aviation. Others are arguing we should make an accelerated transition away from all combustion and not burn anything to essentially electrify everything or use fuel cells. There are also differences with which some policies are implemented. So the scenario 3 is largely a more aggressive implementation of strategies, particularly those that are intended to drive reduction of vehicle miles traveled and to reduce methane emissions. The important thing to understand is none of these scenarios represents a specific plan or recommendation, but they are intended to show the range of options that are available to decision makers and in which the council is inviting stakeholder comment now. Getting back to the commonalities, as I mentioned, the 3 action scenarios all include several key strategies that are fundamental. These include deep improvements in energy efficiency across all sectors, but particularly in our buildings. The draft plan calls for eventual electrification of heating of water and space, primarily through the use of high-efficiency heat pumps and the elimination of gas for cooking, first in new buildings and eventually in existing buildings. To help achieve climate justice and conserve land use, the plan calls for enhanced mass transit, true smart growth, and other strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled in passenger cars and trucks. The plan recommends electrification of light-duty vehicles, and as you probably know, the governor has gotten ahead of the council and has already signed legislation that would ban the sale of gas and diesel-powered cars and light trucks by 2035. And of course, the plan recognizes that our newly electrified economy must be powered by zero-emissions electricity. The plan includes strategies to eliminate high global warming potential refrigerants, as well as fugitive methane emissions across the waste, agriculture, and energy sectors, while maximizing carbon sequestration in New York's lands and forests. And it does include strategies to develop the diverse portfolio of solutions that will be necessary to electrify our industries and to improve our industrial energy efficiency and reduce emissions associated with industrial processes. Low carbon fuels such as bioenergy or green hydrogen will likely be necessary in hard to electrify sectors, as I've already mentioned, such as aviation, heavy duty vehicles, or high temperature industrial processes. But I will note this remains a controversial aspect, with some parties arguing that we should get away from combusting anything, largely due to co-pollutants that can be emitted with combustion. With regard to electricity demand, as we replace fossil fuel heating systems with heat pumps, New York State's electrical power demand will transition from a summer peaking system to a winter peaking system. Bioenergy or green hydrogen, in addition to battery storage, will likely be necessary to ensure grid reliability as electrical consumption doubles over time. The Climate Act allows us to count sequestration of the equivalent of up to 15% of our 1990 emissions toward achievement of our net zero goal. However, achieving this level of additional sequestration in our lands and forests will be difficult. There's not all that much more potential there. So that may require us to reduce emissions by more than 85%, or rely on technologies such as carbon capture sequestration or direct air capture of CO2 and its sequestration. Of course, there will be costs, but also benefits, and NYSERDA has compared the anticipated cost of the 3 action scenarios with the benefits and job creation opportunities. When accounting for both the economic impacts of climate change using DEC's social cost of carbon guidance and monetized health benefits, NYSERDA estimates that investments of a relatively small proportion of the state's gross state product would yield net benefits of $90 to $120 billion between now and 2050, with the costs and benefits across those 3 action scenarios being roughly the same. A large portion of these net benefits will be in the form of public health. As we reduce combustion of fossil fuels to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we eliminate our largest source of other pollutants that cause and exacerbate a variety of cardiorespiratory illnesses, particularly among the elderly, children, the urban poor, and outside workers, and we will see that the reduced health costs associated with that. There will also be health benefits as we move to discourage use of vehicles and to encourage more walkable development, leading folks to get to hopefully get more exercise and reduce obesity. I'll only mention the land use and local government strategies. Again, I'm not going to get into the details of all the mitigation strategies more than I already have, but I suspect this group is somewhat interested in what the land use and local government recommendations were. Those strategies focus on several key themes, as you see up here on the slide, in particular supporting regional and local initiatives to promote efficient land use and smart growth that reduces VMTs. We all know that planning is the purview of land use planning is the purview of municipal governments, not the state, but the state should be doing things to provide better support for local governments. Facilitating responsible development and adoption of clean energy sources. We understand that there's concern about use of farmland and open space to install utility scale wind and solar, but we need those installations and finding the right balance between preserving important habitats and developing the renewable sources that we need will be critically important, and providing communities the necessary tools and resources that they need to act at the local level on climate. We already do some of that. We need to do more. In addition to the greenhouse gas mitigation strategies, as I mentioned, the draft scoping plan includes recommendations related to adaptation and resilience. The 60+ recommendations are grouped as 12 initiatives organized under 3 broad themes: building the state's adaptive capacity, enhancing the resilience of our communities and infrastructure, and enhancing the resilience of our living systems, particularly our natural ecosystems and our agricultural systems, to both current and future climate conditions. Now, these recommendations are not binding on any agency or any entity, but we are already pursuing implementation of some, including, for example, Governor Hochul's direction that DEC and NYSERDA to develop an extreme heat action plan, which she directed in her State of the State initiative, drawing that from these particular recommendations. So this is just a summary of the strategies that are in the draft plan. And I won't review them again, but the council still has more work to do. In addition to considering the public comment it expects to receive over the next few weeks, upcoming council meetings will include additional discussion of several critical topics, including whether we continue to use or we abandon our current gas infrastructure. Again, a highly controversial topic within the council members. Some parties arguing that it should be repurposed to distribute biogas or green hydrogen. Others arguing again this, that we should get away from combusting anything, and that maintaining this gas infrastructure simply would continue a commitment to combustion of fuels. There is also will be the question of how we pay for this. The advisory panels were directed not to consider how their recommendations would be paid for, but obviously they have to be paid for. That will be the council's job, so that will be an important part of the discussion through the next several council meetings, including the potential for carbon pricing. The public comment period was officially to close at the end of April. However, as you note on the slide here, it has now been extended at the request of numerous stakeholders to June 10th. Public and stakeholder input will occur in parallel to continued council meetings and discussion, but you can now submit written comment now through the end of the comment period, again, June 10th. Written comments and questions will be shared, that come from the public will be shared with the council in written format. We have now scheduled public hearings, and I will put the schedule for that up in a moment. There are, I believe, 8 in-person hearings and 2 virtual hearings at which we will be taking, the council, I should say, will be taking input directly from the public. Oh, okay, yes. So again, I just want to remind folks that, and I see there's a mistake there, that the written comment is now through, again, June 10th, not April. If you go to climate.ny.gov, you can read the plan and any of the supporting documents that you would like to read. There are instructions for submitting a written comment, and you will find the public hearing schedule with more precise venue location information than I have here. But the first public hearing will start on April 5th, and the last one will be held on May 10th. Again, 8 in-person hearings, 2 virtual hearings. We are encouraging pre-registration, but it is not required for the in-person hearings. However, priority in seating and speaking will be given to those who pre-register at climate.ny.gov. The in-person hearings will be webcast for viewing purposes only, and the links for webcasting will be posted as they become available at climate.ny.gov. But I just want to make sure folks understand that webcasting of the in-person hearings is only to view them. You will not be allowed to, permitted or able to make comments, provide oral comment at any of the in-person hearings via the webcast. You will, however, be able to provide oral comment through either of the 2 virtual hearings. It's not necessary to speak at more than one hearing, as equal weight will be given to statements made in each forum. If we hear the same thing 8 times, it's not going to be any more significant than if we've heard it once. And equal weight will be given to both written and oral comments. But if you intend to make a lengthy comment, I anticipate that the administrative law judge will use his or her discretion to limit the length of oral comments at the in-person hearing. Typically 3 minutes or so is the standard, particularly if there are a lot of folks who want to speak. And so if you have something that's going to take more than 3 minutes to recite, I would recommend that you prepare a written comment as well. So there is the climate.ny.gov website one more time, as well as a few other websites that I hope are useful. And with that, I will close, and we'll take questions whenever Kate is ready.
Thank you. Yes, Mark. I think Melissa's going to go from Sustainable Hudson Valley, but we do have one, and I'm betting Melissa could probably talk about this when she's starting. If she doesn't want to, we could hold it to the end. But we were asked, where was nuclear in the conversation? And I know the few meetings that I listened into, definitely there was a lot of nuclear proponents. So I imagine that was in the conversation, may not have made it to one of the last slides that you chose to present here today, because this is very much an abbreviated presentation. You know, we all know that nuclear electricity could be a very clean source, but of course the storage of the spent fuel is where the problems and challenges present themselves. So Melissa, if you want to.
Yeah, no, I'm not taking that one on. I mean, I think there are, I don't speak for the Climate Action Council or any part of that process. I think there have been economic issues and safety concerns on the part of some advocates, but I'll defer to Mark.
Well, and frankly, I'm not sure that, I don't believe any of the modeling actually includes includes additional nuclear, although I don't even know that for sure. And offhand, I don't know the details of how much, or how long they anticipate that our current nuclear would continue operating. Remember, the definition, however, of a zero emission source in New York does include nuclear. So under the law, we could have nuclear providing, be this as part of that source of that 100% zero emissions electricity by 2040. I think the challenge, the reality, and I don't know that that the council has talked about this, but the reality is the difficulty of siting. We built a nuclear power plant on the North Shore of Long Island, and it was never fueled, and that was 40 years ago. Are we, is it likely that
We're still paying for it?
Yeah, exactly. And so, is it likely that any place in New York State is going to welcome a power plant, a nuclear power plant?
Yeah, and I have also heard that, and this kind of makes sense, the scope 3 emissions, the fuel cycle, all of the mining and milling and transporting stuff for use in the nuclear system are, very carbon intensive. So,
yeah, and that's certainly true. I mean, our inventory does not at this point include scope 3 emissions. For those of you who aren't oriented that way, scope 3 refers to the embedded emissions of stuff that you buy or import. But I think that the reality is that if we started to contemplate nuclear, that those scope 3 emissions would be also something we should consider.
Anyway,
Okay,
shall I move us on from that?
Yes, please do.
But with respect for the question, because this has, I want to just really express respect for the Climate Action Council, everybody who's coming from any perspective on how we think about this, and all of you who are here, not to mention Kate, who is so good at bringing us together, because this is actually really hard. I don't know about you, but in the last few weeks, seeing the war and the increasing dependency on, the oil pipeline reopening, all that, it said to me, we really have to bring home a sense of responsibility and creativity in what we're doing. So I'm going to share my screen and talk for 15 minutes at the most about a regional climate action strategy that a group of us has been formulating in support of and in parallel with what's going on at the state level to try to build a bridge between this amazing policy work and what we can get our arms around, the regional and local ramifications, okay? There is my screen, there is my slideshow. And Kate introduced Sustainable Hudson Valley. I'll just say we are a small organization. We work regionally, and we try to take on a project or two that are catalytic, that are kind of asking questions that haven't been asked, or accomplishing outcomes that haven't been accomplished on the ground, mostly in the policy framework that exists. So our Solarize program, funded by NYSERDA back in 2015, was instrumental in opening up the solar marketplace with community education and group purchases and stuff. Kate was involved in that. We helped about 400 households and small businesses to go solar. We've done similar stuff with electric vehicles, including training dealerships in how to sell them and not be scared of them. When Project Drawdown was published and creating a buzz, we did a lot of exploring what are the local climate solutions that aren't being tackled, and we helped to form New Yorkers for Cool Refrigerant Management to advocate for dealing with what we call the invisible opportunity of the worst greenhouse gas pollution. So when the Climate Act was passed, we were part of a series of meetings of folks who had worked on a sustainability plan. You all may remember way back the Mid-Hudson Regional Sustainability Plan, published in 2013. It had the aspiration of achieving this same kind of decarbonization, and it was a basis for funding projects, but it didn't really have a full implementation pathway. And a lot of us from non-governmental organizations, local governments, and so forth kept meeting just to think about what was working and what wasn't. And when the Climate Act was passed, we said, here is a moment. And without any dedicated funding, we and the Hudson Valley Regional Council said, let's create a strategy. We didn't want to call it a plan because the state policy framework was still coming into focus. And it would be pretty pretentious to say we've got the plan before we really know what the guiding policies are. But we wanted to get folks thinking together about what we could actually take responsibility for. And so the Regional Council is a council of governments whose members are the counties, and they've been supportive at the staff level for what we're doing. We have pulled together, I think, about 90 skilled volunteers, including Kate, including several of you who are on this call, people who work for agencies, nonprofits, county planning staff, cooperative extension, Clearwater, Scenic Hudson, motivated individuals, just people who are into this stuff, want to do something creative, and don't need too much permission from the home office. That's our working group, representing 7 counties, and organized into working groups that are similar to what the state did, but not identical, really looking at what we felt most capable of dealing with and what was most directly relevant in our region. And so you see on the left, emissions reduction. We had a working group on energy that Audrey was part of, transportation, agriculture, forestry, and land use. We did a formal working group on materials management, and I wasn't surprised to hear the governor say that it was 12% of our footprint. And we also did a group on water because we suspected that the energy and water connection would be quite significant. And in looking at all these issues and all the opportunities, we tried to think about 4 what we called cross-cutting themes. Where are the economic development opportunities? How can we build in resilience? What can we do about environmental justice? And what are the needs and opportunities for education? So we have achieved a first draft. It is going to want a second draft, but it is a sign of life, and we're really excited to be sharing what we've gotten done. We worked around really 3 guiding questions, and the idea is that policy can incentivize, policy can create supports, policy can require, policy by itself can't make people care. And we asked ourselves, just imagine in our cities, towns, and villages, in our region, and our organizations, what's it going to look like to achieve the goals and directives of the Climate Act? What's the critical path? And this was something we weren't used to thinking about. It was not easy to really imagine that. Who needs to be involved? It's way more than us. Many of the stakeholders have been brought together by the state. And I, just want to reinforce what Mark described, the yeoman amount of work in bringing together farm organizations and urban public health organizations and, the trucking industry. But we're looking at who needs to be involved at the agency level and the community level that we can get at. And then finally, what can we, those of us, that bunch of 90, actually do to move things along? Not surprisingly, we came up with a bunch of kinds of answers. Our regional climate strategy discussion draft is on www.sustainhv.org. It's only 80 pages. And we even made a friendly little executive summary. So there are actions around implementing and enhancing policies, expanding funding for priorities that are obvious, education and consensus building on how to move forward, for example, in energy siting, which Audrey will talk about. There are recommendations that definitely involve major capital projects and multi-year investments, and lots of consensus building that is yet to do. But there are also low to moderate cost, hands-on projects in and for communities. You know, from serious tree planting and green infrastructure to economic development projects. We'll talk more about all of that. So energy, when you read the draft scoping plan, it will be obvious that we need an almost incomprehensible amount of renewable energy. And the state is already investing in offshore wind and pressing the utilities to upgrade transmission lines and setting the stage for large-scale solar. Audrey will probably talk about the Office of Renewable Energy siting that in theory is there to sort out controversies. But what we realize at the regional scale is that nobody is going to solve local siting controversies other than local communities themselves, and they're not going to be easy. So our regional priority is to build a consensus on preferred sites. You can't do renewables without doing energy efficiency. They're overpriced, inefficient, bad for the grid, and makes a hard job harder. We are at the dawning of real growth in building energy upgrades. And as Mark mentioned, that this is the use of our footprint. Of all, just the homes, the low to moderate income homes that are eligible for state weatherization rebate programs, 1% have used them. So we need to reimagine the ground game. We need more customized solutions. We need more personalized outreach. And so we're supporting and working with a new program called the Clean Energy Hubs Initiative from NYSERDA to really engage people in a less cookie cutter, more personal way. Transportation, we've said it's about electrifying everything and getting people, helping people choose transit and biking and walking. So some of it is, you know, at the local and regional level is what we call acceleration through coordination, which is getting EV education and charging and dealer training all happening in a coordinated way. But we identified a broader spectrum of vehicles than are really discussed in the draft scoping plan. And at one end of the continuum, e-bikes are a game changer for local communities. And there are some state incentives now, but they're limited to bikes that are really not commuter worthy. And on the water, you'll see this slide here is the Solaris. It is a passenger boat that's begun to pilot ferry service. It is on the Hudson at the Hudson River Maritime Museum, first Coast Guard inspected solar passenger boat. And one of the individuals who's worked with us has put heart and soul into strategic planning and designing of more solar vessels. So this is a thing we hope to advance. And, you know, think outside the car. It's going to be not just electrification, but helping people to understand their range of mobility options. It's going to be a huge project that we can all get creatively involved with. Hang on. So agriculture, forestry, land use, the power of regenerative agriculture, even if it's a relatively smallish part of our emissions reduction, is transformative for farmers and for the environment. What we've learned is that farmers aren't prepared to believe that it works until they see it works on their soil in their region. And There are plenty of efforts in play with organizations like Scenic Hudson to begin to create ways that farmers can be paid for regenerative practices. What we've been teasing out is ways to make those more customized and make sure that resources to pay for results are really accessible to small farmers and are integrated into farm management in ways that they can digest and utilize. Forestry, the state, I believe, is beginning to translate the vision into strategic planning, but there's a whole sustainable biomass action plan to be developed or in development, and Mark can nuance that better in the discussion if he wants to. But forest products and forest industries are, to me, one of the most exciting regional opportunities that we've seen. Moving water is really about 2% of greenhouse gas emissions, pumping from drinking water to wastewater. But we are at a point with climate change where we're seeing both too much water and too little water, and more new pollutants and pollution stresses that are worsened by climate change. And the environmental justice dimensions of water, look no further than Newberg and the PFAS issue. And so we are looking at how to just up the game across the spectrum, working with organizations, like Riverkeeper and the Watershed Alliance that are, respected in this space. But the first step that we're looking at is how to bring training about climate impacts to all the watershed associations and others that are protecting local water resources. And I'm not going to belabor that. Materials management. This, to me, was, I can't say exactly why, but it was the most fun. I think because early in our conversations, we were looking at what's going on around us, and we started talking about the likely, at that time, likely closing of the Seneca Meadows landfill. That looks less likely or less soon at this point. But we looked at the new food waste law, and one of our committee members just blurted out, "Stop transporting waste." And we all thought, that'd be radical, but maybe. And we started researching all of the work that's been done in regions to create circular economy, to divert lots more waste and grow remanufacturing. All the paper that we now recycle at best could make cellulose insulation. Ground glass could be filling trails, or it could be part of low carbon concrete. Anaerobic digestion of invasive plants and food waste to create biogas. We found a master's thesis on all the potential for biogas production from putting anaerobic digesters near population centers to capture the food waste that our new state law requires diversion. So this is big, but it's an example of when you start looking in more detail at the regional response to the state directive, this is the kind of thinking that we've been having fun with. And you can't talk about materials in the Hudson Valley and not talk about the Repair Cafe. And there are about 40 of them right now, teaching young people and teaching neighbors how to fix things and not landfill them. And so growing that kind of stuff and hopefully getting repair into the schools is part of our regional strategy. And every single aspect of this is economic development. And when we look at what's going on in the priority communities, the law calls them disadvantaged, disinvested, overburdened, we hope that we will not only have opportunities for access to good green technologies for healthier and safer, more comfortable homes and more transportation choices, but also new ways to own resources. We had about 81 people in and out of our environmental justice conversation. I didn't count them all because some of them were just on the edge, but we really took seriously and got a lot of good challenging comments about what the Climate Act has taken on, how important it is, and what a lift it is going to be to really engage community organizations. And this is something I think the state understands very well. But we have, as part of our regional strategy, comprehensive community engagement and involvement piece that is about working where we have deep relationships with conservation councils, with community organizations. And we're, making the rounds, making sure that everybody we know in the priority communities knows about these hearings and knows about this sweeping change. And we've been trying to figure out sources of additional funding, and I'll come back to one thing that we're working on. One of the great questions that we got asked as we were consulting with people came from Ernest Tollerson, the chairman of Riverkeeper. He said, I have no doubt that New York will figure out how to move electrons with renewable sources. My question is, will we figure out how to share ownership of the assets in a way that really changes the game? So we have been working, and we're still at work on this, to look at how economic development recommendations, environmental justice, and resilience can be aligned toward that end, and education as well. And Dave Conover on our staff, last year we did Climate Solutions Week. We ran with partners 36 events, and Dave sort of did an informal survey, just asking people on the street, what do you know about the Climate Act? And he got a lot of blanks. And I think it's safe to say that we need a lot of education to support this visionary work. So I'm going to just say, for us, the path forward is maintaining communication with state staff and with community partners, deepening our understanding of what we can really do, improving the baseline data that we have to measure regional progress, and looking at short-term fast-track projects that we can do. And so just before I hand it off to Audrey, I'm just going to let you take in my favorite Peter Drucker quote and share a few of the things that are beginning to happen as a result of this initiative. We had no clue when we started this. We were the grown-ups. We didn't have permission from anybody. We found that when we had that first draft, everybody's going, wait a minute, this is really going to happen. And we kind of got a second wind. And so our agriculture group is framing an agenda for better research to prove what can happen with regenerative practices. Our water group is starting to sketch out that training I mentioned. Our materials management group has done one briefing for a regular meeting of county recycling staff and is getting ready for another one. In economic development, this is something I'm telling you, hoping it won't jinx it, but we have got a couple conversations going with the Calvert Foundation, which has an investment note that allows crowdsourcing of community benefit businesses like affordable housing and green energy projects, and lets mom and pop basically invest their cookie jars in them. And this thing is operative in a number of states, not yet in New York, but we're hoping to build enough support to bring it into the priority communities so that there's more of a path to ownership as well as just benefit. And last but far from least, I think the most dynamic thing that has been associated with this is that Scenic Hudson and Clearwater have had more time to talk to each other than I think they would have about energy siting. And as a result, put more investment into the energy solar decision tool that I'm going to have hand over to Audrey to talk about in about 30 seconds. And they have been working with cohorts of communities, I think 15 or more, looking at like, where do we put the renewables? And there's another cohort coming up. So we're just trying to hold a vision of what this exciting state legislation translates into in our cities, towns, and villages in our region that is big enough to matter and yet small enough to do something about. And so I can't give you a better example than to hand it off to Audrey Friedrichsen from Scenic Hudson.
Thank you, Melissa. That's great. Thank you very much for all that. I do just want to inject while Audrey's bringing up her slides. Today I learned that in Orange County, Warwick was our first one. They're also the co-author of the wonderful book that was put out probably 2-3 years ago now. But we also have a repair cafe in Middletown and Newburgh. So if there's folks out there that are interested, if they have some hidden talents, we'd really like to get to know you. You could always email me. But also if you're interested in championing one in your neck of the woods, please let us know and we can help you. I believe actually that co-author is on tonight and she's coming back on March 30th to talk about a lot of materials management. So please join us if you would like. Audrey, are you ready to go?
I sure am. Hopefully everyone
Great.
can see my screen.
We can, thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Mark and Melissa, for setting this up. I think what I'm going to try and do for folks is to sort of connect a final dot tonight in this conversation. Really quick, one more time, I am from Scenic Hudson, where I am the land use and environmental advocacy attorney. As Kate mentioned, I've been focusing on smart renewable energy siting for the last several years. So that's what I will cover tonight. And just to sort of, remind us what we heard from Mark and the importance of electrifying the economy and the fact that it needs to be powered by emissions-free energy. And then the next dot, so to speak, drawn by Melissa with the concept of renewable regional strategy for this kind of action. So this is literally where, to me, at least the shovel goes in the ground, right? Local action for renewable energy. Kate mentioned the powerful groups of volunteers and the impacts that they can have, right? So if you are a member of your CAC or your Climate Smart Community Task Force, or you're a planning board member or a town board member, this is really where, based on the direction, the recommendations, the strategies, the support that are coming from the state level planning and the regional level strategizing, we can really see some things happen here on the ground to meet those renewable energy targets. So really quickly, I'm sure you're all familiar with Scenic Hudson. We are based in Poughkeepsie, and we're actually just this past week back in the office after working remotely for a couple of years. We're really all excited to start getting back together and working on our mission where we protect land and the river, but also do things like promote renewable energy. So just to sort of bring this down a little bit more narrowly from where Mark got us started, right? If we recall, in the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, there are those renewable energy targets, all in the interest of reducing emissions. So a little bit more detail here on how New York State is going to achieve that. He mentioned the clean energy standard, right? That's what we call that 70 by 30 and that 100 by 40 target. And the clean energy standard has a few strategies under it. They're called tiers. Tier 1, which I didn't even mention here, is an effort to maintain existing renewable energy facilities. Tier 2 is incentivizing the building of new renewables, as Mark told us. And for the most part, we'll, when we think about renewable energy, obviously in New York, we have at least on the land side, large scale wind and large scale solar. When we talk about large scale, we're talking about quite large, right? Over 25 megawatts. And for a point of reference, a megawatt of solar energy takes about 5 to 6 acres to build here in New York. So every year, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, puts out a solicitation to award contracts for new large-scale renewables to increase the amount of renewable energy injected into the grid, as Mark described for us. So in addition to large-scale renewables, there are what's called distributed energy. And so if you think about where these kinds of projects might connect into the grid, just sort of a very kind of a rough rule of thumb is that probably large scale projects are going to be connecting into transmission lines, right? Those high voltage overhead lines that you see versus distributed energy resources. Those most likely will be seeking to connect at the distribution level, right? The telephone poles. And to help promote that kind of distributed energy, at least the solar kind, NYSERDA also runs something called the New York Sun Program. And you remember on Mark's list, there was a target in the CLCPA of 6 gigawatts of distributed solar energy in the state. Well, they just recently proposed to expand that to 10 gigawatts because we're already at 3 and we have enough in the pipeline to get to 6. So this program is going so well that they're looking to expand it even more. So this is how we are getting there, right? If we ask the question, Melissa described to us that we need a huge amount of this energy, not only just to transition from our existing energy generation needs, but to what we're going to need in 2030, 2040 and beyond. Of course, taking into account efficiency, we do need to expand our resources. And I was really struck by something that Mark said, right? That we've sort of left this so long now that there are very few options we can leave on the table. And one thing that people often ask is, well, why can't we just put it all on roofs, right? Why can't we just put it on parking lots? And really, when it comes to renewable energy, we really need an all hands on deck kind of strategy. And that's exactly what's happening here under the Clean Energy Standard, right? We're trying to keep our existing renewables. We're trying to build large scale on land renewables. We're trying to increase our distributed renewable energy. Also, I'm sure you've heard, it's been in the news lately, New York has an offshore wind target that they have been working very hard to promote. And then also there is something called Tier 4, and that is a strategy for transmission lines to bring clean energy from upstate down into New York City. And the benefit of that is it will replace the dirty peaker plants that are impacting disadvantaged communities and environmental justice communities and try and clean that up. I know there are varying positions on whether or not those two projects that are currently proposed to do that are the right ones. But at the very least, we can know here that this is one of the strategies under the Clean Energy Standard, is to transmit clean energy from upstate into New York City area where it's very hard to build large scale renewables. And after the 2019 Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act was adopted a year later, in order to help achieve and really create a glide path for all of these renewable energy that we need to build to get done, as part of the budget, the state legislature adopted the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act. They never have done us any benefits here to give us short names. So while we can cut the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act down into the CLCPA quite easily, it's kind of hard to make that into an acronym, but we call this the Accelerated Renewable Act. And this law also had quite a few pieces of it, all in the service of trying to help accelerate renewable energy, but also make sure that benefits are getting the communities are getting the benefits of that. There is a new permitting process for those large-scale renewable energy projects. You might have heard that the old process was called Article 10 after the article in the New York State Public Service Law where it was housed. And that law applies to all kinds of energy projects. So for instance, the proposed repowering of the Danskammer project that Mark mentioned is being done under Article 10 of the Public Service Law. But now we have a new permitting process. It's housed in the New York State Executive Law. They call it 94C. And that process uses a set of uniform standards and conditions. And what they actually almost operate as, if you're probably familiar with land use law, is almost like a set of special use criteria that any renewable energy project needs to comply with right from the get-go when an application is submitted. And this is something Melissa mentioned. A new office was put into the Department of State called ORES, the Office of Renewable Energy Siting. And so that is a new entity currently staffing up with full-time employees and probably consultants to help all of these projects that are now in the queue, right? Thousands of megawatts of new wind and solar to get through the permitting process. So we now have ORES up and running and even have some projects now conditionally permitted. Something else that was kicked off under the Accelerated Renewables Act was a grid study. And there is currently a coordinated grid planning process going on, right? It's all very nice that we're soliciting proposals for new large scale, that we're incentivizing new distributed energy, but we also need to make sure that our grid, right, which was first built to handle large scale generation at fossil fuel plants and then transmit it over long distances, we now need to make our grid into a smart grid that can handle energy that is both intermittent because, right, the sun doesn't shine all the time, the wind doesn't blow all the time, also handle storage that we need to build in, and also handle energy that goes in two directions, right? Because if someone's rooftop solar array is generating more energy than they're using, they can send energy back into the grid, which is a new thing that hasn't happened in the past. So we need to make sure that the grid in conjunction with our utilities are planning for this immense change and electrification that needs to happen. One really neat aspect also of the Accelerated Renewables Act is what they call the Build Ready program. So this is where people can nominate sites that they think are good places for renewable energy to be built. And those sites are things like brownfields or landfills or maybe a defunct shopping mall, right? These are kind of the places where it certainly would make a lot of sense to build a renewable energy project on an already impacted site. But the costs might be higher because it will require some level of cleanup, right? So NYSERDA is helping to get those sites ready to go and then turn them over to developers to get built. And the whole idea is, you know, even if it might have been more expensive on the open market to do it, now we can take advantage of those sites through this program. One other thing, as is referenced in the title of the law, there is a legal requirement for those large-scale renewable projects to provide a benefit to the host community. It comes in the form of a bill credit. So that's to make sure that the community, the ratepayers in the community get at least that one additional benefit from the large-scale renewables. I mentioned really quickly another thing we need is storage. There's a storage target that the state has set in a significant amount. And so we need the market and other forces in place to help that get built. And then finally, one really interesting thing that's happening and is sort of directly related to the solar mapping tool and the toolkit that Scenic Hudson has put together is we need the information to do all of this. There's a lot of data out there that is needed, right? How much energy does a certain community need? How many greenhouse gases are being emitted? You know, how many ratepayers are located in this area? How much capacity is there on this distribution line for us to be able to connect a renewable energy project? So the state, and you know, in order to try and promote all of these things in the area of decarbonizing the electric sector, is also making sure that there's going to be enough data publicly provided out there for all of the stakeholders in that process to have the information they need to achieve their goals. So that is very quick and dirty, you know, this context that we are working in here with regard to renewable energy, which, as Mark pointed out, is only, you know, one part of the scoping plan that we are working with. So at Scenic Hudson, as I mentioned, you know, we have been trying to promote the smart siting of solar energy. And one thing to note is that here in the Hudson Valley, we don't have many wind resources, so it's probably solar energy that is going to be our major form of renewable energy. And we also don't have that much room for large-scale projects. So for the most part, the kind of projects that we are going to see are ones that are incentivized under that New York Sun program that I talked about, that has now had an increased target from 6 to 10 gigawatts. There are some large scale projects that are currently under development and review in the Hudson Valley. They are located up in Albany County, Greene County, and there's currently one that has just begun the ORES process in Copake. But for the most part, in the lower parts of the Hudson Valley, we're going to be seeing these smaller projects. And they are what they call either commercial/industrial. That is a term that's used under the New York Sun program. And those are projects that are probably somewhere less than 750 kilowatts. So that's probably like a rooftop facility at something like a big box store. And then community solar, which is another thing that we haven't even touched on tonight, but it is a form of solar that you can subscribe to. And for the most part, those kinds of projects are somewhere around 5 megawatts in size. So that's like, you know, using the rule of thumb of 5 to 6 acres, somewhere between 25, 30, maybe a little more acres in size. And so from our point of view at Scenic Hudson, you know, and to really build on what Melissa was talking about and what the scoping plan is looking to do, Mark mentioned, you know, the land use and local government themes of facilitating responsible siting of renewable energy. We really think that the Hudson Valley can be a model of a swift and just, right, transition to renewable energy. We can do it in a way that conserves all of those resources that we have worked so hard to protect and preserve, and what makes this, you know, a great place to live, all at the same time getting economic, climate, and cost-saving benefits. So the question is, how can we do that, right? What is one of the best ways to do that? And from a land use perspective, I really think that one of the best ways to do that is for communities to have in place comprehensive plans and zoning laws, right, that send the message to the developers of where and how they think these projects can best be integrated into their community. That's exactly what planning and zoning does, right? If you think about any other kind of land use, right, multifamily housing or industrial uses, or you know, single family homes, right? The way you look at them is you think about your community where these things make sense, and then you write the plans and you write the laws to facilitate that. So in order to help municipalities in the face of, you know, these new renewable energy policies and increased applications and developers looking to build these kinds of projects and people looking to put them on their roofs or in their side yards or wherever, we have put together a toolkit. We call it How to Solar Now. And it really is to put information in the hands of the decision makers. And it's all in the interest of making Hudson Valley into this regional model. And we have 3 pieces of information in our toolkit. You can find it at howtosolarnow.org. I'll talk about them really quickly. We have a siting guide, which is actually our oldest resource now. It's a few years old. We also have a set of recommendations and best practices for solar zoning that came out at the end of last year, actually 2 years. And we also have a solar mapping tool. So I will talk about those each very quickly and how they can be used. So first, our Clean Energy Green Communities Siting Guide. And really, you know, this is a set of from the SMART principles. And the whole idea is if you design projects from the outset in a way that minimizes impacts, right? And prioritizes redevelopment, avoids impacts to natural resources, it will help to streamline the review and approval process, right? Reduce costs and delays, and ultimately help achieve our renewable energy goals, right? That 70 by 30, that 100 by 40 target. So this is kind of a, kind of set of no-brainer principles that we recommend, for the most part, developers, right? And also communities to think about when they think about where and how renewable energy can fit in. So that was our first resource that is available also at How to Solar Now. Recently, we also put out a set of recommendations for solar zoning in the Hudson Valley. I know that NYSERDA has a very comprehensive guidebook for local governments, a solar guidebook. There is a model solar law in there. There's a lot of other information. There is a guidance document for comprehensive planning, I believe. And so we wrote this, knowing that all of these other resources are out there. But again, this set of recommendations is really with those siting principles in mind. And there are 12 key recommendations in the zoning guide. I won't go through all of them. I would just pick out a couple of them. Number 1, be pro-solar, right? Obviously the best way and easiest way and clearest way to send a message is to have statements in a comprehensive plan or for the town legislature to adopt a resolution that says, look, we are interested in having solar in our community. We want it to be responsibly sited. And then you can, kick off a process, whether it's to adopt new comprehensive planning or new zoning or revise it in some way, and get those groups of volunteers together to run through this process. And then one other, as we go through sort of a chronological order of what to do as you undertake a solar zoning process, one of the main things is to plan smart, right? Take a look at your community and think about where the places that solar energy can be allowed under the zoning code and promoted. So that is what I will focus on when it comes to our solar mapping tool. And this is something you can also find at howtosolarnow.org. It might look slightly intimidating when you first go to that website and you click on the map. There is a registration requirement. It just asks for an email account for the first time, and then you can continue to access the tool. And really all you need to do is start reading. So as I go through the next set of slides, you'll see screenshots of what the tool looks like. And I'll explain all of the parts of the tool. And the tool was really developed to be used in a couple of ways. It's an educational resource guide. It can help inform the conversation. It can, kind of provide a common starting point because it puts everything on a map. Everyone can look at the same map. And in addition to comprehensive planning and zoning, which is sort of like the major use case for the mapping tool, you can also, hone in on a particular site, a particular tax parcel, and look at that site and get information about it. For instance, if there are wetlands on there, agricultural soils, you can see if there are distribution lines or transmission lines in the vicinity. So you can look at a particular site. And then our sort of big, going back to what Melissa was talking about, regional plans or, municipality-wide plans. If you are going to think about coming up with a climate action plan as a community, and you say, okay, what if we said we want to have 10 megawatts of renewable energy in our community? And then can we do it, right? And so do we have the room for it? And that's another use that the mapping tool can potentially support. So really quickly, because I know we're getting short on time for the evening, the tool has 4 parts. Part 1 gives you some information about solar technology and the solar market. Part 2 provides a 4-step approach to smart planning for solar. Part 3 is the longest part, and that is where one by one you can learn about all of the different layers that you can turn on and off in the mapper. And the mapper contains geographic information system, GIS layers, right, which takes information and then visualizes it on a map. And you can learn about all the different layers that the map has in it that you, as a user, can turn on and off in part 4. And that's where you can put it all together. We also have like a workbook that you can print out and use as you go through the tool to record information so that you can then use it for your particular use case, especially, for instance, planning and zoning. So real quickly, the approach to planning for solar that we suggest might be different from the way that a developer would plan for solar, right? Probably their first question is, okay, where can we connect this to the grid? But from a municipal point of view, we think that maybe the approach is the other way, right? Look at the community first. What are the existing land use patterns? Secondly, find the opportunity sites, right? Where are the parking lots? Where are the large rooftops? Where do you maybe have a landfill or a closed mine, right? A place where it will make sense, the low-hanging fruit for siting new renewable energy. The third question is, okay, where are the places that maybe we want to continue to protect, right? Natural resources, agricultural lands that are in active production, right? Historic resources. What do we want to continue to protect? And again, the mapping tool puts these on a map for you. You can turn those different layers on and off and start to answer those questions. And then the last question is, okay, now that we sort of have identified the places where it might make sense to put solar, where are, is there a point of interconnection there? And even if there isn't, maybe that's not so bad, right? It's kind of the idea of build it and they will come. If we zone for it, right, maybe that should be integrated into that grid planning process, right? And then we can have the grid come to the areas where it makes sense to put solar. One really important point is that not everything can be put into that map. It's not one map to rule them all, right? Local knowledge is exceedingly important. This is where those volunteers that Kate mentioned come into play, right? The CAC members, the members of the public, the planning board members. Do you already have an agricultural protection plan? Do you already have a natural resources inventory? That local knowledge is very important and should be brought to bear when using the tool. So real quick, so this is what it looks like, right? As you go through it, on the left-hand side, you scroll through and you simply read the guidance. On the right-hand side is the map. And so here, this is an example of one of the data layers where you can see existing development patterns, right? The yellow is agricultural, green is more forested, red is more developed. And this helps you answer that first question, right, in the 4-step planning process. What is the, the existing development pattern in the town? That we also have previously impacted sites. We have large building footprints in the map. So now you can start to answer that second question. Where are the opportunity areas that it would really make sense to put some solar, right? Here we can see a mine, right? And there is a data set out there that the Environmental Protection Agency puts out where they have found these sites, put them on a list, included information about how much solar might actually be able to get built there. And then we incorporated that list and put it on a map, and it's included in the solar mapping tool. One more example here of large building footprints, just a little bit more blown up, right? You can focus in, or you can scan out to look at these as a whole. It'll give you the sizes, right? And this is where you can really start to calculate how much room do we have in our community to start to get this kind of energy built, right? And then the third question in the planning, right? Where are those resources we want to protect? Wetlands, designated important wildlife habitat, mature forested areas, historic areas. These are all more data sets that we have been able to incorporate and put into the map, data layers that you can turn on and off. Here's an example of one, core and important forests, right? So the mapped areas here, the darker green, the lighter green, those represent core forests and forest edge. And then again, the information on the left-hand side helps you learn about what those mean and how they're relevant to solar energy siting. And what we're really most proud of is that in conjunction with the joint utilities, right, with ConEd and Central Hudson and NYSEG and O&R, we got them to let us stream in what they call hosting capacity. And the colors here along the mapped distribution lines tell you how much capacity there is in the line to be able to connect up new distributed energy. And we see that as a proxy for planning, right? If you can combine this information with information about where it might make sense to build solar, now you can really start to see how this can be put into comprehensive planning and incorporated into zoning districts, right? And again, just because there might not be capacity now, doesn't mean there might be capacity later. And of course, someone can always invest the money to do the upgrades. So here is just a quick shot with some details on when you get to the part of putting it all together, right? And you now have control over turning on and off the layers. What you can also do is draw. You can measure, right? So if you find a particular area that you think makes sense, you can draw a line around it. You can measure how big it is, how many acres it is. And again, record this kind of information in the workbook that we give you that really starts to inform and be that plan right step in a planning and zoning process. And so bringing it all back to what Mark talked about and the scoping plan at the very top of the evening, one of the very detailed recommendations in the state scoping plan that's currently out for public comment under chapter 13, which is the energy chapter, there's a recommendation. And it says that the state should develop a clean energy development mapping tool, right? And it should be statewide to help municipal representatives and local communities make informed land decisions and signal, right? Communicate their local wants and needs to developers. That's what you do through planning and zoning. It is a public statement of the type of development that you think makes sense for the community. We are really glad to see that. Our solar mapping tool right now covers the Hudson Valley only, but it was made to be replicable. So we really hope that the support to do that statewide mapping comes into being, and the funding to do that, and then also the funding to help municipalities, right, do this work, because you can't do it in a vacuum. You need the town attorney, you need the time, you need to publish the notices, you need the consultants, you need to do the seeker review. So hopefully that will be an on the ground set of resources and funding to get this done. So hopefully that all made sense. I know it was a whole lot of information that was put out to you tonight very rapidly. Thanks again for having us here. I will stop sharing and then turn it back over to Kate.
I'll take it. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Audrey. Yeah, those local laws is what we need to see to prepare for what's coming and to help ready the so many issues that folks have concerns about, whether it's the land use, the economic benefit, the pilots, so much to be talked about. And again, that little group of important people can help a municipality lead that charge. So thanks so much. We're going to go straight to questions. I have a few, but I always have some questions. In no particular, well, we'll go down in order here. So how about explaining the nuclear power anymore? Why was not part of the plan? Mark, did you want to elaborate any more on that? We can't hear you, Mark. And then after you find out,
There we go. Okay.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, I think we covered that as much as we can cover it at the moment.
Okay. And Larry, if you want to follow up with me, if you have some more concerns, you could always follow up with me and we could try and talk through it. It's a much larger conversation than at face value. And what about the hearing or the lack of a hearing in the Hudson Valley? We have folks asking after seeing your slide, Mark, why isn't the Hudson Valley represented there?
I don't have a good answer for that. I was not involved in the scheduling. The law requires that we hold 6 public hearings. We've scheduled 10. I'm not trying to pass the buck. I just don't know what the thinking was on how that schedule was set up or where they were located. I assume they felt that Albany is part of the Hudson Valley, but I also know that it's not part of the lower Hudson Valley. So I don't have a good answer.
Right. And the closest one to the south is the Bronx, and Albany is the closest to the north. So, okay.
And Zoom is the closest to Zoom.
Right.
Kate,
yeah.
just to follow up, Kate, on something that I think that Melissa threw in there. There was a petition circulated and submitted. I think it's been submitted. So stay tuned, everybody. I think New Yorkers for Clean Power headed up an effort to request a hearing here in the Hudson Valley. So hopefully we get one. Otherwise, do plan to either attend virtually or try and get up to Albany.
Right. And it was also pointed out that outside of New York City, our region has more areas defined as disadvantaged communities. So I remain
but
hopeful.
that'll be a different set of hearings, and I don't know where they will be located.
Okay. All right. So Joseph's asking, if we move to 100% electrical power, does the CLCPA address emergency power during grid failures?
Part of the power there is an advisory panel known as the Power Generation Advisory Panel, and part of one of their principles was to maintain reliability. That said, I think the approach is that resilience comes really through sort of 2 approaches. One, making individual homes resilient. So if there is a power outage and there's no heat, the term they use is passive resilience. And this goes back to our energy efficiency. The better a home is weatherized, the longer it can stay comfortable and livable in the absence of a heating system. But also there are recommendations, and even in the recommendations that, the adaptation recommendations, to require more investment in assessment and hardening of our electrical grid to ensure its reliability. But even beyond that, I think that, we keep hearing this, and I think it's a bit of a red herring, because every gas and oil system I've ever had in my house needed power to run, needed power to start, needed power to operate. So that I'm not sure that we are any more vulnerable to a power outage if we have an all-electric heating system than if we have one that is, a fossil fuel but still requiring electricity to operate.
I was thinking more of community buildings, hospitals, commercial facilities, more than housing itself.
Well, even if they're using fossil systems, they still need electrical power to operate.
Yeah, there's a lot of diesel generators out there existing today. Most public facilities and hospitals have the dirtiest kind of generating on their rooftops, which,
Yeah,
usually
I
diesel.
live 1,000 yards from one of those, and I know when they're running that emergency generator, yes.
Yeah, they're loud and they're dirty, but something needs to replace them.
Well, I think, and you might get into questions of having sufficient capacity for a large facility like that, but I think solar plus renewable plus storage is the approach that we're going to see taken for site-specific resilience.
Okay, thank you. And has the monetary burden of the average New Yorker been taken into account? Living in New York is very expensive, as we all know, and adding burdens to individuals will only create a bigger exodus from the state. In the last census, New York was the state with the largest population decline. Are we regulating ourselves out of existence?
Well, first of all, New York State's population didn't decline. It didn't grow as fast as other states, but it didn't decline as of the census. But that aside, the law does require that the council consider costs and benefits. At this point, the council has considered, and I alluded to that, the system-wide costs and benefits. It has yet to start thinking really about individual costs, because that will be determined by specific programs as they're developed. So as policies and programs are developed, those the individual costs and who will bear those costs will have to be a decision that's made. There has been, I think, a lot of fear-mongering with implying that people are going to have to invest tens of thousands of dollars in the near term. It's just not true. No one is going to be asked or expected to lay out $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 and weatherize his home and replace all the appliances all in one swell swoop. But anyone who owns a home goes through a transition where they need to replace the stove, they need to replace the dryer, the heating system. And I think what you will see is transition away from that. So when things have to be replaced, then we'll see replacement with non-fossil fuel fired appliances.
And I would just add, when Mark describes, programs, none of us has time to keep up with all of the programs that NYSERDA is developing and rolling out and refining, but one of them is called Clean Energy Hubs, and it is about bringing together people who do energy outreach with social service agencies and community organizations to really reach people who are, least able to afford big investments, and make sure that they understand all of the, low to no cost things that they can do. And, I have seen, and I must confess, haven't read in detail, but I saw that NYSERDA was actually soliciting partnerships with banks, in addition to the New York Green Bank, which is an affiliate, to develop more low-interest lending programs to help people who do want to replace their hardware sooner than later. So there's a lot of thought and care being put into this.
That was addressed more towards the middle class. If you're not poor and you're not rich, the middle class gets slammed. And it's not so much you have to lay out tens of thousands of dollars all at once, but it's all incremental. And I get 60% of my take home. Only 40% is given away in taxes before I even spend a dime. The burden gets, if you keep increasing the burden, you're going to drive out the middle class and the jobs. That's my point of view. I'm not disagreeing with any of this. I'm just saying that has to be taken into consideration, that the middle class usually, are the ones that are the hardest hits. The rich can afford it. The poor get subsidies or programs or get taken into account. And the middle class are the ones who get left holding the bag. At least that's from my experience in this state. I've been here for 30 years, and the taxes here are astronomical.
Yeah, I don't know if you've accessed energy programs in particular, but they really are designed, I forget what the cutoff is, but it's maybe it's a percentage of median income that's fairly high. I mean, it's middle. They're designed to take middle class to support middle class as well as really poor people.
I'll
Yeah,
have to
and I
look into it, but thanks.
I think, you know, the point that Mano Joe is making here in the chat is worth emphasizing, that for most of these solutions that would be put in place at the individual level, over the long term, they are cheaper to operate. It is usually the initial investment. You know, New York State spends something like, we ship out of state about $24 billion a year to buy fossil fuels. And in terms of the job creation and local economic opportunity, I think, you know, switching to local renewables creates jobs. And also think about what we do on the international market. The European Union over the last several days has begun considering imposing a border tax, so that an entity that is, and in this case, they're actually talking about a nation that is not operating under a capped emissions system will have to pay an extra tariff to export goods into the European Union. And if we are, you know, want to participate in that global market, we're going to have to take steps to control our emissions. And it will benefit us more if we are among the first to get there.
Right. So folks, please take a look in the chat. Mano Joe, an Ulster County legislator, is very seasoned in this field, and she's giving you an example to really give you an eye into that. I guess I would comment though, Mark, isn't it, like you said, New York's one of the most, if not the most progressive state in this at this point with this initiative. And that is, I don't want to say the cost of being the most progressive, but the rest of the states are going to follow suit. And it's just a matter of we're the first ones there. And again, of course, logically, it's going to bring down the cost of all of the replacements, but it is a slow and steady process, like you said, like the cars with the catalytic converter, with the electric vehicles. It's slow and hopefully manageable for most folks. It's just, we understand Mark's point that, you know, the middle class definitely always feels it more than the other two. Having said that, Joseph also wants to know, before I go there, how about Melissa's comment that due to the closure of Indian Point, the Hudson Valley is experiencing significant cost increase in electricity year over year until additional generation is brought online, whether green power or otherwise, we will see higher prices for years to come. Matt, I know you were very involved in this. You're more than welcome to chime in here if you want, but Mark, Melissa, Audrey, do you have anything to say?
I'm not sure how direct that connection is. I mean, when people are feeling, whether it's gas prices or energy costs, it kind of doesn't matter what the reason is. It's painful. And I think everybody involved knows we have to manage this transition to make it less painful.
Yeah, we would love Mana to chime in here. And, you know, what we said again, there's storage, there's another issue underlying an active nuclear plant 40 miles, not even north of a major city, especially given this time of potential war. So outside of electricity, there's that other issue of the location. So here's another one regarding the 94C regulatory detail. How does 94C supersedes local zoning? Is that correct, Mark, Audrey?
I can address this. Actually, 94C requires compliance with substantive local laws, except those that the ORES, right, the Office of Renewable Energy Siting, decides to waive based on a demonstration of justification on the part of the applicant, based on a balancing test. And it really, you know, it's if we applied the substantive local law versus, you know, is the benefit of that outweighed by the benefit of, you know, waiving the local law, in the interest of meeting the CLCPA target. So actually, it's a very similar provision that was in Article 10. There was also a local law waiver provision under Article 10. And a very detailed justification analysis that needs to happen. But the main rule is that substantive local laws need to be complied with. And if an applicant does seek a waiver from a local law, they need to justify it. And there is also sort of a front-loaded process where the applicant needs to have contact with the host community early on and start to discuss the issue of and identify the potential for needing waivers from local law.
Okay, that question was from an elected official. So Mike, if you need a little bit more to that, please email or contact Audrey directly in the chat box. So I want to make sure you got that answer. Okay, so I think that was most folks' questions. No, we have, yep, you answered to Mark about the Northeast Carbon Alliance. Check that out, please. How about a little different? What about promoting cover crops for farmers? The practice improves soil and soil structure, reduces the need for fertilizers, and sequesters carbon. The federal government is now encouraging it for farmers as well.
Yeah, that was, Kate, that was my response to Mark on his question. And, you know, I don't know how detailed it is in the scoping plan, but the scoping plan includes agricultural practices. The Sustainable Hudson Valley Climate Action Strategy includes agricultural practices. And like I mentioned, that Northeast Carbon Alliance is a group of folks who are really working on strategies for carbon sequestration, including regenerative agriculture. And I know that cover crops is one of the strategies that regenerative agriculture uses. So you're right. Yes, the federal government is looking into promoting that. And there are a lot of people who are talking about it and thinking about it, and looking for ways to make sure that the farmers who use that strategy are, you know, properly compensated. That's the real question. How do we quantify that and compensate it?
My understanding is that on a large scale, you can get a lot of carbon sequestration with it. A lot. It's pretty substantial. It's not minimal. That's why I think they're pushing it, and I think it's a great idea.
Great.
I'll add that the governor's executive budget includes a substantial increase in funding to support resilient farming and to enhance practices to improve soil management.
Manna has her hand
Fantastic.
up, but there's also
Yep.
a Joe question that's a very interesting question. So I don't know which you want to do first, Kate.
I didn't see another question. Melissa, what did
Has
you
there been
say?
any discussion about floating solar arrays in the Hudson River? China has
That is
been
the
doing
one I
this
missed.
everywhere.
That's right.
You know, I think as concerns bubble up about, for example, Canadian hydro is a lot under discussion. We need to really, you know, keep looking at what we mean by in-region renewables, and, you know, keep building consensus among the environmental community on what risks are connected with what technologies. I was also talking with a documentary filmmaker who recently moved to our region, who had been interviewing people like European companies making very teeny tiny tidal devices that seem to be super low impact. And so I think we need to study up on this stuff without bias and get creative.
There is a proposal at this point that's gotten pretty far along, including in our permitting process, to install floating solar panels on the Cohoes Reservoir, which is a man-made lake. One of the things you have to be concerned about, and we would be concerned about from a permitting perspective, as you know, the more natural a waterway is, the more environmental effects a large floating structure are going to have. Certainly in the Hudson River, you'd have navigational concerns, effects on the biota. But there are locations, again, you know, man-made reservoirs that aren't used for other purposes where this could be a potential. But you have the problem, are they near interconnection sites too?
Yeah, I threw really quick. There's an article from not too long ago in PV Magazine. I think it's that Cohoes project that Mark mentioned, and I would second those concerns about something like the Hudson River, which is tidal and has a current and is a designated critical habitat for sturgeon and all of those things. That it might be more difficult, but the idea of floating solar on some of those man-made or more still waters certainly is interesting.
Okay, Manna, please.
Thank you. I just want to have people be clear that the New York Independent System Operator did an assessment and determined that there was enough existing power on the grid to close Indian Point. And at that point, our demand was going down very slightly and gradually, but had been going down steadily for several reasons, but energy efficiency being an important one. My concern is that we need to get the renewable energy infrastructure in place with storage so that it is completely reliable, because we're pushing beneficial electrification of vehicles and homes and other buildings, which is very valuable. But we want to be sure that the renewable energy infrastructure is put into place ahead of any increase in electricity demand. And I think, I want to be sure that'll be one of our major comments on the draft scoping plan, is to be sure that the funding and the support is available to get this infrastructure in place very quickly, so that we can meet the goals of 70% renewable generation. And I don't remember what the current battery storage goal is, but we really need to, as much as possible, ensure that storage is associated with generation, and that will take the pressure off the grid and promote reliability. But it was a wise decision to close Indian Point. It had repeated failures and was an aging facility, but and there are still 4 reactors operating in Western New York, and getting the renewable energy infrastructure in place will allow us to phase out fossil fuel and ultimately do without nuclear and have a high level of reliability. But it's going to be a big push to get from here to there, and it's got to include energy efficiency. It doesn't make sense to have to oversize a facility because you have a leaky building. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Manna. We appreciate that contribution. Mark's asking again about tidal energy as a renewable. Are there any plans for that in the future?
I don't think it's, a lot of these potential sources are fairly minor relative to the demand that we have to meet. Actually, there is a tidal energy project that was installed, 12 years or so ago in the East River, feeding power to Roosevelt Island. But I don't think that it's contemplated, that would be a large source at the level that, the thing to understand is that this scoping plan is a pretty high level document. There's a lot of more planning that goes into implementing even this scoping plan. The state energy plan is one more level of planning, and every project goes through its own planning. So, I don't think there's anyone who, there's nothing stopping someone from proposing a tidal energy project, but I also don't see the state putting a lot of investment in it just because the potential to scale it up is quite limited.
I mean, to be fair, it is a low tech and not really invasive way to get some small. I look at it as when they, they're manufacturing in landfill, when they, capture the flare gas and they use it for something. It's small, but it's easy to do. So it's something that should not be not investigated because of its small contribution.
Well, you do have to look at, how much is it going to cost? And is it going to divert resources, both in terms of research and development, but an installation from technologies that might be more cost effective and able to scale up? I mean, certainly offshore wind is the most expensive technology we have at the moment, but that does save us from building on land. So there is a trade-off there between saving some land and cost. But we can scale up offshore wind. I'm not sure, again, that there's a whole lot of potential to scale up tidal. Not saying there's anything wrong with it, other than it may have limited potential. I mean,
Right.
There are technologies that put hydro generators in water mains, in 3-inch water mains to generate power. That's great, but it's not something that we're going to scale up to, to meet much of our demand.
Right. Someone's
Hey,
asking about
could I just say one thing about tidal? I just want to point out its high level of reliability, that the moon pulls on the tides regularly twice a day as they come in and out, and they can be captured in both directions. I think there is room to explore it more, but to do it in a way that protects the Hudson River ecosystem. But I just wanted to point out that reliability. The wind blows when the wind blows, and the sun shines however many hours a day and then doesn't. But the tides are, as long as there's an ocean, and there's going to be ocean, there's going to be a lot more of it. So the tides pulling in and out really have a lot of potential energy that could be captured. Thank you.
Thank you. And on that practical note, Mark, you had said that there's an internal argument, discussion, pros and cons of keeping the gas infrastructure for future energies intact. And I guess I liken that to the railroad right-of-ways, right? They kept those intact, and now we're benefiting from them, predominantly rails to trail. So I'd like to think if they're there already, and we've invested an enormous amount of money, that we could maybe keep them and try down the road. Other things you said, Mark, makes me think when you brought up the walkable development. In my past work, I find a lot of, and I could say this about the state because it's the same with the county, the departments don't talk to each other. So we have the Department of Ed that promotes these schools that are just massive and one floor, and they're spreading out, and they have to have this athletic facilities, and there's no sidewalks there, and it's all busing with diesel to get there. How do we work on that? How do we incentivize that to change? I think, and again, it also feeds into local development. How do we get the density in? With build the sidewalk, structure the network to get there, and then how do we incentivize taxpayers that they get a deal if they're walking their kids to school, or being bused, and then they pay a larger rate on their taxes. Transportation is the second largest expense to school districts after staffing, and it's probably even more nowadays with the price of gas and the incentives salary increase. Since they can't find drivers, I would say it's almost double what they're paying. So how do we work that into the equation? How do we build that?
It's changing mindsets, and I'm not a land use planner, but everything I know about the development of this planning and zoning law over the last several decades has said we want people living over here, we want them to work over here, we want them to go to school over here, we want them to get in cars to get there. And that's what we have to change. But that means changing the mindsets of planners, of elected officials, and of residents. And that's just, I think, a long, slow educational process. And most of it's going to take place at the local level. because it isn't, for the most part, it's not the state that does that land use planning.
I would
Okay,
just
and
wanna
that's
put
what
in
we're
a
doing
plug
tonight.
for even more for everybody here talking to people that you don't normally talk to, and watch sustainhb.org, not to plug just us, but we're really trying to figure out how to scale up educational efforts so that more people take this seriously and, you know, understand some of the nuances that we've been able to hear tonight.
Right. Right. Well, and I appreciate all of your time and staying past our 2-hour mark. I would like to remind who's ever left here that the greenhouse gas inventory that was mentioned a few times by our speakers, we, Orange County, received a DEC grant some time ago. I think it was DEC. It was so long ago. And we're trying to do that countywide as well as for our towns and villages. So we need, again, that group of people to work with, and the municipalities that have that active group of people that are responsive to working with our office, we're going to work with them first. We need to, you know, generate maps and have public hearings. We need boots on the ground to help us get that through to your municipality. So please think about that. Contact my office. If there's any outstanding questions, please contact me. I believe the speakers also provided their email addresses. I could end on one last thought. I know some of you have to go, but Mark, how do we get pollinators or solar on the state medians and the side of the roads? Why do we continue to spend thousands of dollars, probably more each year, to mow them when we could put something functional and usable there? Everyone else can leave. He can answer my question.
The Department of Transportation will tell you they've done numerous projects along those lines, but they will always come down to highway safety and not putting, you know, things like solar panels on poles along roads can create a safety hazard. And with a lot of what, you know, I'm a former wildlife biologist, so there are things that I would recommend they do for wildlife that they're going to claim affects visibility and so forth. So yes, it's something that DOT has heard about numerous times, and again,
pollinators don't need any kind of attention. If anything, we're jeopardizing the health and safety of the mowers out there several times a year. It was the 2008 recession where I saw a letter to the editor in the paper, and someone crunched the numbers, maybe a retired DOT employee, and stated how much we spend, because remember, gas went up then too, how much we spend on mowing the median and the roadside. So that's what's planted my seed years ago. And I just want pollinators. And we all know that it happens in other countries, Germany, Austria, right? So why we don't do it? So, all right, well, I can keep going. So
just really quick, they used to have it on the Palisades, on the Palisades Parkway. I don't know if it was in New York or New Jersey, but they used to have wildflowers in the median, large areas of wildflowers in the median. That was maybe 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, and then they just got rid of it.
they have it in 287, La Crosse, Westchester.
Oh,
and
I don't go down that far.
There's a name, you know, there's a program, but again, we should be doing it all over.
I'm going to make a note to put it in our comments to the draft scoping plan. And I'm sure Scenic Hudson will be or has done comments, and Kate can keep us all in touch. But
also, Kate, can I talk to you offline or contact you offline? Because the CAC in Montgomery is trying to get something started where we have wildflower.
Why don't we hang on? You can hang on right now if you want, Mark. We could start that. I'll let everyone else go if anyone has any parting words. I thank you all for coming. I want to remind you that on March 30th is our next one, and we're going to be talking about repair cafes and materials management. And on March 31st, we're going to be talking about natural resources inventories. And then there's April. You'll all get an invitation.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you. Safe home, right? As I'd say if we were in person.
I just wanted to mention that the CAC in Montgomery, we're trying to create wildflower areas where we get rid of the lawn areas and plant it with wildflowers for the pollinators. We started in a small patch in one of the village of Walden parks. And we're going to try to expand it to Benedict Park and set up some more areas. And eventually we want to just try to incorporate in as many areas as we can. You know, given that we have to ask people's permission on this, and if it's if it's along a roadway, there's site areas, you know, you can't put it in intersections where it's going to cut down the site, that kind of stuff. But we're trying to get something started. I would eventually like to have Benedict Park. There's a large area where they have fields. I'd like to get large areas of that set up where we can plant wildflowers for pollinators. Because I think we're losing a lot of pollinators, and we need a lot of, you know, we need a lot more pollination plants for wildflowers, stuff like that. Plus the beauty of it. So anything like I'm very interested if you have anything like that you can get communities, multiple communities in this county involved. Maybe we could have like a necklace of pollinator areas. They don't have to be big either. I think you could put it along any side of any highway, any area where there's an open area. I don't know how you feel about that, or if there's something you're interested
No,
in.
I'd put them everywhere, anywhere. Again, it's better than a lawn. It needs no maintenance. You leave it there and it just does its thing. So I welcome that, and I appreciate you including the county, guys. I know Montgomery does such good work, but the county needs volunteers. So if you want to help me spearhead that, Arlene just also volunteered. Thank you, Arlene. If you know other folks, that would be great. Just to even start talking about this in planning, if I could reach out to you and maybe we even make some sort of smaller committee, start targeting this. I can give an example that the new government center, they removed all of the trees along the Rio, we call it the Rio Creek, it is. So it's unsightly, it's bad for erosion, it's terrible for the thermal load of the creek. And lastly, it just invites your Japanese bamboo. Oh, I knew I had another question from Mark. I think it was Mark that brought up the biomass, because if you could take it from the invasives he brought up, if you can take all the Japanese bamboo out, that would be a great use of it. So again, I need interest. I need support. I could annoy my county DPW. They're going to ignore me like DOT on the state level ignores Mark from DEC on the state level. You know, everybody does their thing and they're not thinking a little bit out of the box.
I've talked to people in Warwick and Greenwood Lake who are interested in it as well. They have Zoom meetings, the garden, they have a community garden down there, and I talk to them. I can ask them if they want to get involved on a county level, or if they're more.
Well, the Greenwood Lake, I think I connected you with them. They have a gardening club for anyone else who's interested.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. And I think I've talked to them a few times about that, but again, their gardening club is really more about individuals getting together and discussing gardening questions. I've offered my 4-H group that I've started of girls to help. So again, it's a committee. If you and Arlene are interested, anyone else wants to jump on board, if you know folks, put my name out there. MJ Wilson has some ideas, or at least some experience. You know, I'm open to doing and trying anything. So part of what I talked about is climate smart communities in the early part of my talk. They have task force. And like Melissa talked about, we call them working groups when we did that regional plan on the sustainability effort, the coalition that we have. So one of our groups is open space, land use, and agriculture. And this can certainly be part of that. So we welcome it.
Okay.
And we can talk all night, but until we really get an idea going, where do we go with this? I think it's better if we want to set up a meeting, email me and we could do something.
Okay, I'll bring the people on board on the CAC who are interested. I know Patricia, the chairperson, is interested in it. And I would like to see like necklaces of wildflowers all over the place so that the pollinator insects can go from one flowering area to another flowering area and just have it all over the county or all over, wherever it's possible.
Right, but the necklace, the implication with the necklace is it's a linear connection. So we may not want to say necklace, pockets, rings, if you like jewelry, bracelets, maybe.
Pockets sound
we
good.
want pockets. If you have any connection with your Boy Scouts, you have a very large troop. I think starting there would be huge that we connect with them. If you can get some sponsorship, they don't have to have deep pockets. You can buy 500 pollinator seeds. The kids can go out, just walk through the woods. This is also some other one is very important, not ginseng. I think it's the ginseng seed that is also something that you could just go out and plant it. The kids are walking, they're out and about, you're talking while you walk, and you put it there. The wetter season would be better. So it's a little late for that, but hey, Mark, if you want to talk soon, we could see what we could do and hope for a very wet, late April, early May, if we could ever get our act together. But we need bodies because we can't do it. I can get my 4-H group. I could talk to my scouts, but we still need the gardening club. We need folks to get together and to do this.
Yeah, I agree. Our problem is labor shortage. We don't have the labor.
Right. Because I think you could, the pollinated seeds are cheap enough. I think you could get someone there to hopefully buy some for the scouts.
Well, our CAC purchased some, and we have plenty of areas to put it in, but we just don't have the manpower. We do it by, we kill it by, we don't till, we just put down tarp and let it die, and then we reseed it. That's what we did in the first one. That's what we plan on doing on other ones. Putting down a tarp and letting nature, suffocate the grass, and then just till it lightly or scrape it lightly and throw the wildflowers down, and then let them do their work, And what we did was we did it in the late autumn to give the perennials a jump on the plants, and now they're coming up in the spring, and the weeds are they're going to hopefully beat the weeds out and create a wildflower. And then once that's done, we walk away from it. It's really low maintenance. We don't really have to do much, hopefully.
Right. The one thing I'd say is that before you kill the grass, you